How could a single life last nearly 1,000 years? What secret lies behind the ancient name of Methuselah, whose age stands not just as a marvel of longevity, but a sign, a signal, a prophecy woven so deep its meaning echoes into eternity? What if his life was less about breaking records and more about serving as a divine countdown, a flicker of holy patience hiding in plain sight before a flood wiped the world clean? If you've ever felt a stirring, a wonder, a curiosity about the mysteries of heaven, the invisible world's battles, the secrets of the soul, or what truth really lies behind our first breath, then you are in the right place. Like this video, subscribe to Bible Stories, and comment 777 if you've ever wondered about the mysteries of heaven, the hidden war of the Spirit, or what truly happened before humanity's earliest dawn. Your insight, your questions, your voice make you part of a chosen generation that yearns for truth beneath the surface. Let's begin calmly. As all the greatest journeys do, one quiet heartbeat, one breath, one choice to sit with the questions. Let the noise of the world fall away for a moment. Imagine stepping into a time when creation itself was fresh, but already beginning to tremble under the weight of violence and forgetting. Picture a world where mercy has grown scarce, where hope feels fragile, and where righteousness is more memory than reality. Into this backdrop, a boy named Methuselah enters, a newborn with eyes that seem to hold some ancient secret. His father Enoch is not like other men. He does not simply believe in God, he walks with him, living with such a faith that the ordinary walls between heaven and earth barely seem to exist. If we can, let's try to imagine the lessons Enoch gives his son. Each morning he points not just to the beauty of sun and stars, but to their deeper meaning, the breath that calls light into being, the river that sang in a land called Eden, the flame that now guards its lost gate. Enoch's lessons are not about being noticed or impressive. Instead, he teaches Methuselah that righteousness is about alignment, an invisible thread anchoring us to something holy. So even when the world loses its way, the heart remains steady. There are nights when Enoch speaks not just of stories, but of memory. Eden remembered as something real, not just fable. He places his hand over his son's heart and says, "That fire is alive in you. Guard it, even when others forget it ever existed." Each lesson is a seed, sometimes whispered beneath the trees, sometimes asked gently as they walk through a village. What spirit do you feel here? Is there peace in this man's words? Enoch trains his son to read not just actions but atmospheres, the deep sense that prophecy often whispers rather than shouts. Yet behind all these lessons, a shadow grows. The elders whisper of reckoning, a coming day that will burn away old ways. Is it just fear? Or is there truth to the growing sense of unease that fills the world? For even as humanity drifts further from its creator, Methuselah remains a rare light, a flicker in an age threatening to collapse into darkness. What would it mean to be told your life holds a meaning the world does not yet see? To be raised with the sense you are carrying a piece of prophecy itself? To live in days when goodness is mocked and evil applauded, and still be asked to stand firm? One day the world changes forever. Enoch, the man who walked faithfully with God for 365 years, vanishes, not by death, but by mystery. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, for God took him, the old stories say. In a moment, silence swallows a lifetime of faith. There's no grave, no long farewell, no explanation. God has claimed him, not as punishment, but as an honor for a life so fierce in faith that only heaven could contain its end. Methuselah is left alone. His father's lessons are now a mission, the mantle heavy on his shoulders, the only living echo of Enoch's walk with God. The sense of responsibility is almost crushing. He must keep faith alive, not just as stories, but as a flame carried forward into shards of a dying world. What prophecy did Methuselah carry in his very name? Many scholars say Methuselah means, when he dies, it will come. But what will come? Did even Methuselah fully know? He must have felt it, though, in the decaying earth, the groaning sky, and in the rising evil that choked the land. His every breath became a warning, each act a pause in the countdown, each year a trembling delay before some great judgment. Would any of us hold steady if our life itself were the ticking clock of prophecy? Methuselah does. Time in those days drifts slow and heavy. Years are measured not by minutes, but by lifetimes. As Methuselah becomes a father himself, holding his son Lamech, he gazes into the same deep eyes that once marked Enoch. He feels the awe, the urgency, the calling not just to keep a family alive, but a legacy, a faith pressed down through generations, fierce as it is gentle. Methuselah passes down Enoch's lessons, not just as knowledge but as conviction that the God who hovered over the deep, who shaped the world from formlessness, who still whispers mercy even as judgment looms, is not far. In these lessons, hope is not an argument or a defense. It is a flame guarded in silence, humility, and obedience. Yet, hope carries with it the ache of absence. Methuselah feels his father's loss like a shadow, never gone, but never quite close. The older he grows, the more deeply he seeks God, not just in ritual, but in quiet moments, in the wrestling hush beneath the stars. Some lessons take a lifetime to understand. Some wounds never heal, except in the process of handing wisdom to the next generation. Methuselah prepares Lamech not just to survive, but to see purpose hidden even in pain. He whispers, "There is always meaning, even when you cannot see it. Even in silence, God is speaking." As the years pass, Methuselah's heart remains fiercely loyal to his father's memory, his voice trembling in every story, every prayer, every time he guards the spark of righteousness. Can you feel the weight of that calling to be a bridge between what was and what must yet come, to kindle light when darkness presses in? This flame of faith, handed from father to son, takes root in the hardest soil, sometimes growing unseen for generations. For all who have ever felt like a stranger in their own generation, who have sensed the world grow cold, even as they keep believing, Methuselah's story is an anchor. His presence is a living memory that righteousness need not roar, that the smallest faithful act is not lost in the silence, and that wisdom, patience, and faith endure even as the world forgets their value. If this beginning speaks to your soul, remember, subscribe to Bible Stories, and comment 777 if you, too, hunger for the mysteries of heaven, the battles of the Spirit, or the truths waiting quietly beneath the surface of Scripture. In these ancient stories, there is a living invitation to become part of a legacy, a chain of faith that crosses centuries, unbroken, waiting for yet another heart willing to listen for the whisper behind the noise. The shadow of Enoch's departure hovered over Methuselah's life, an ache that never quite left his spirit. When a generation loses its living example of walking with God, who steps forward to carry the flame? What happens to a soul trained from childhood to sense the invisible movements of the Spirit, to wait for a voice others cannot hear? Methuselah did not choose this burden, he inherited it. And sometimes, inheritance feels more like responsibility than privilege, more like standing guard at the threshold between two worlds than resting in the comfort of certainty. After Enoch vanished, silence filled the air, not just the physical quiet of absence, but the profound hush of a world missing its last, clearest echo of what it means to truly walk with God. Methuselah's life became a tension between promise and peril, between memories that were precious and a future that seemed uncertain, if not terrifying. Yet, as the world around him spiraled deeper into violence, pride, and spiritual forgetfulness, Methuselah's role as a torchbearer sharpened. Every day was a test of endurance. The world's once bright hope faded, with violence as common as sunrise and compassion waning like the moon. Methuselah watched as people chose self over sanctity, power over prayer. In this hostile climate, clinging to his father's legacy took more than willpower. It required deep trust that goodness was not a lost cause. Methuselah remembered the warnings Enoch had spoken. Evil would prosper, and the righteous would shrink in the world's eyes, but God's promises would never be late. Even if you stand alone, you are not abandoned, his father's words echoed, a compass that would guide Methuselah through every lonely night. Instead of anger, he chose tenderness. Instead of thunder, a quiet voice. Methuselah understood that in times of spiritual drought, even the smallest seeds of truth matter. Words spoken in hope, prayers whispered in the dark, lessons imparted when no one seems to listen. He cast seeds into barren ground, uncertain if they would take root, but certain that faithfulness is measured not by immediate fruit, but by obedience. Faith was no longer a safe path. In many ways, believing in righteousness became an act of defiance against the prevailing current. Isolation, misunderstanding, even danger pursued those who still cherished the narrow way. But Methuselah refused to abandon the walk. He pressed forward, not because he had seen the end, but because he trusted the voice that had begun the story. All of us at times are called to this kind of obedience, to keep watering hope even when it feels like only dust answers back. Seasons passed. Methuselah became a father himself, and when his eyes met those of Lamech, he saw a depth and purpose kindled there, a spiritual inheritance richer than blood. He understood, the way Enoch had understood before him, that legacy is not about survival alone. It's about giving the next generation roots so deep that even when evil becomes the air they breathe, a few souls might yet bloom in faith. With urgency, Methuselah became not just a teacher, but a living anchor, reminding Lamech of a God who shaped the deep and whispered mercy even in judgment. His lessons shifted from mere information to conviction, from ritual to anchoring hope. There is always a purpose, even when you cannot see it. Even in silence, God speaks. His words became not just knowledge, but anchors against grief, the unhealed wound of losing his father, a silent partner in every prayer. As he aged, Methuselah grew quieter in spirit, but deeper in longing for God's presence, not satisfied with ritual, but seeking the hush of mystery, the comfort of knowing that peace is found only near the divine. Enoch's calm faith, his unshakable trust that all things are held in God's hands, ripened within Methuselah until it became the very strength he offered his son. Some truths only bloom over a lifetime. The burning absence of Enoch was less a wound to heal and more a calling to live out. The knowledge that he was now the last living witness to a better way was both heavy and holy. When the world's voice clamored for attention, Methuselah cherished the quiet. The grass withers, the flowers fade, but the word of our God endures forever. Isaiah 48. It was that endurance he fought to embody, teaching not only his child, but his child's children, and perhaps anyone in his house who would still listen. Storms battered the land, both physical and spiritual, their violence a mirror for the corrosion of souls. Humanity drifted, haunted by self-destruction, pride, and the abandonment of all that was sacred. Methuselah witnessed the world's decline and, with it, the sharpening of his own calling. Faith no longer made a man celebrated. It made him an outcast, a relic, perhaps even an embarrassment. But the real battle was not out there. It was interior. Would Methuselah surrender? Would he mutter into despair? Or would he remember that the truest resistance to evil is remembrance itself? Just as his father whispered stories of Eden around campfires, Methuselah poured himself into Lamech and later into his grandchildren. His words became so much more than bedtime tales. They became sacred maps for surviving spiritual famine, shields for enduring storms of the soul, seeds waiting for the breath of God to awaken them when the season was right. In these simple acts, handed down with humility and solemnity, Methuselah and Lamech kept something holy alive, like embers carried in cupped hands through a howling wind. The world's indifference did not extinguish their flame. Where most people forgot, a lineage silently, stubbornly endured. The power of a legacy, Methuselah came to see, is measured not by applause, but by persistence, by the willingness to retell the truth when the world calls it irrelevant, to stand when others run for comfort. He found that sometimes the line between courage and compassion is so thin it can only be held in silence. And then, a miracle. Noah was born. Instantly recognizable, the light in his eyes was not just hope, but destiny, the same radiance Methuselah remembered in Enoch's gaze as he spoke blessings and prophecies long ago. As the world caved in on itself, corruption, cruelty, and spiritual amnesia gaining ground, Methuselah and Lamech recognized this new soul as chosen, set apart in some way they could not yet explain. They shaped him, not with pride or anxiety, but with reverence. They taught him that truth is a treasure to be guarded, that conviction is the well one must always return to when the desert grows dry. Noah grew up on the stories of the beginning, the fall, and the God who remembers, the kind of wisdom that carves a vessel from within long before any floodwaters rise. Noah was different. Where other children chased noise, he sought quiet. Where other young men delighted in attention, he hungered for meaning. Methuselah sensed the prophetic arc. There will come a time, there will come a man who must bear what even Enoch could not carry. Was this the one? Every story, every whisper, every lesson from sacred memory landed on Noah as if he was gathering them for a purpose still unfolding. Legacy, Methuselah saw, works forward as well as backward. It's not about being remembered by the crowds who mock or ignore you, but by the one soul whose carrying of faith changes everything that comes after. In this way, every act of faithfulness, every patient teaching, every flame tended in the dark becomes prophecy. Like a hidden foundation, it holds up a future only God can see. So when you see echoes of divine intent in those who come after you, remember to teach them not only what to believe, but how to survive. Not only how to be brave, but why. If a moment of destiny comes to your door, will your hands be ready to pass the flame, to trust the one who follows? As Noah listened, the sacred waiting, the sense of holy tension grew. The heavens whispered warnings, signs intensified, and the air itself began to tremble under the weight of what was coming. Methuselah realized the truth. Every faithful life is, in some way, a countdown, a warning to the generations that time and mercy are neither infinite nor to be taken for granted. If these words draw you deeper into the story, give a quiet amen with your heart. And don't forget these truths. Subscribe, share, and ponder how the smallest acts of faith can ripple on and on, long after the world has forgotten your name. For it is not the thunderous who build eternity's foundations, it is those who carry the flame in silence, watching and preparing the ones who will weather the flood. Sometimes the world moves so fast we forget to notice the quiet ones, the flames that burn steadily through the darkness while chaos and confusion rage outside. Methuselah's later years were a living testament to the power of quiet faithfulness, a lesson for every age, but especially for our own. If you've remained with us through this journey so far, take a moment to subscribe to Bible Stories, And if you've found a mirror to your own convictions in Methuselah's story, share in the comments what legacy you are hoping to plant, even if it seems invisible to everyone but God. As Methuselah watched his grandson Noah mature, he became more aware than ever that the most profound callings are rarely accompanied by applause. Age gave Methuselah a sharpened clarity. The task he'd inherited was not just to keep ancient wisdom alive, but to embody it as the world reached a breaking point. For centuries he had lived as a bridge, bearing memory, teaching, walking the narrow path, while the world grew more unrecognizable with every passing generation. There was a melancholic wisdom in him, a patience forged by loss, by burial after burial, by prayers whispered over ground that never seemed to yield fruit, and yet still he sowed. Noah was not just a son of promise, he became a kindred spirit, the one to whom Methuselah would entrust the weight of his nearly 1,000-year journey. With each passing season, Methuselah observed the earth's transformation. Corruption, once subtle, had grown rampant. Violence and selfishness had become customary. The elders grieved for a lost world, but few knew what it took to keep a lamp burning when the night stretched long and cold. Methuselah's faith was forged in this crucible, a light refusing to be extinguished by public indifference. Through each shadowy year, Methuselah sensed history's rhythm shifting. Sometimes the signs were subtle: unpredictable storms, animals restless in their movements, the uncanny stillness of nights when no wind dared to blow. Other times, the warnings were sharper: prophets raising their voices, dreams of disaster, and elders admitting their hearts quaked at the nearness of judgment. Methuselah, though no prophet himself, could feel it in his bones. A threshold was approaching, and every story, every lesson, every act of humility was preparation for a moment that only God could see. Legacy often requires answering questions long before anyone knows to ask them. While others lost themselves in daily distractions, Methuselah pressed in, sharing memories of Enoch, warnings about the wages of corruption, mysterious hints that God's mercy, though vast, is ultimately finite. God's patience is not absence, it is mercy, he would tell Noah by the faint light of evening fires. And when mercy finishes its work, the world changes. Noah listened, neither afraid nor dismissive. He received Methuselah's words with the solemnity of the chosen, recognizing that the calling to build, to warn, to obey was not a matter of personal success, but of survival for all that was still holy, collapsing world. Each conversation between grandfather and grandson took on new urgency. The old man's lessons were not just survival skills, but maps for navigating a coming storm of unimaginable scale. With the rhythm of true discipleship, Methuselah gave more of himself, passing not only wisdom, but the courage to act upon it, even if those actions seem absurd to all others. As Noah entered manhood, the sacred thread connecting all three generations, Enoch, Methuselah, and now Noah, felt more tangible than ever. It didn't require explanation. It lived in the quiet conviction in Noah's eyes, in the heavy pause before they prayed, in the silent agreement that the days of preparation were almost done. Methuselah's pride ran deep, but so did a trembling beneath it, a knowledge that his own work was nearly finished, and the greatest test, the real crescendo of their family's assignment, awaited Noah alone. Across the land, the mood had changed. The celebration of evil was nearly universal, virtue openly mocked, the burden of righteousness heavier than ever. Yet Methuselah watched as his grandson stood beyond the crowd, a man transformed by the quiet inheritance of faith. In times of darkness, righteousness can look like stubbornness to the world, but Methuselah recognized it instantly: the mark of Enoch, the inward fire, the refusal to drift even when every current points the opposite way. The closer Methuselah came to the end of his days, the more he questioned, have I given Noah enough tools, not just to endure, but to obey? Had his words planted conviction deep enough to outlast the flood of confusion? These doubts weren't born of regret, but of love, a burden for the one who would carry everything forward. Their final evenings were marked by few words, but immeasurable significance, each moment like the slow drawing of a bow before the last arrow is let loose. Methuselah rarely needed to speak. Each glance, each gentle hand on Noah's shoulder carried history, hope, and the silent charge of all the righteous who had come before. Yet, when he did speak, it was to remind Noah of God's unbreakable faithfulness. God has endured much. His judgment is never vengeance. It is the last mercy for a world that refuses every other gift. Hold to what you know no matter what comes. In the hush of those conversations, Noah leaned into his legacy and prepared not for comfort, but for obedience. And so, as age finally slowed Methuselah's stride, the mission approached its final chapter. The air grew heavy, the world tense, and even creation itself seemed to tense for what was coming. Noah, no longer a student but a chosen man, moved with urgency, not from fear, but from trust in a calling that could no longer be denied. Methuselah watched with a bittersweet satisfaction. His assignment, though heartbreaking, was coming to fulfillment. He had spent centuries preparing the man who would not only endure the storm, but obey the voice that commands it. The year Methuselah died, there were no trumpets, no outpouring of public mourning. Instead, the world hurried on in darkness, barely noticing the veil that had fallen. But heaven noticed. A shift had occurred, a centuries-old shield removed. The countdown was over. The mission passed to Noah, and with it the full weight of faith in a breaking world. Noah stood alone, surrounded by whispered memories, a sacred toolkit of faith burning in his spirit. Wordless days followed Methuselah's passing, days that felt like the world itself was holding its breath. In that silence, God's voice came to Noah, clear, precise, and unmistakable. Judgment was near, but so was preservation. Catastrophe, but also a chance for the seeds of faithfulness to be planted anew. Noah obeyed. He did not seek proof, did not wait for company, did not build for the sake of glory. Each plank, each stroke, each steady motion was not just work, it was worship, prophecy in action. While others mocked, he remembered Methuselah's steady hands, Enoch's stories of a world vibrant with hope. He drew from their reservoir of patience and courage. In every act, Noah rebuilt not just a boat, but a world, a testament that the faithfulness of the quiet endures long after the last mocker grows silent. Faith, Methuselah's life teaches, is not a shield from storms, but a call to prepare amid the thunder. Our legacy, like his, may never be noticed in the noise of the crowd, but every seed of truth becomes a forest for those who come after. That's why in every silent act of obedience, we become torchbearers, bridges between what was, is, and yet will be. And perhaps the greatest test of any faith is building the ark, even before a single drop of rain falls. If Methuselah's steadfast example resonates with you, remember, quiet strength sown today may be the only thing that keeps the next generation afloat tomorrow. Like, share, and subscribe to help keep these ancient fires burning, that others may find courage to build their own arks, plank by plank, prayer by prayer, faith upon faith. What happens in the silence after a legacy bearer is gone? The world spins on, indifferent, but in the heart of the one chosen to continue, an ancient weight descends. Noah now stood beneath an empty sky, a sky once filled with the prayers and prophecies of Enoch and Methuselah, and discovered that legacy is much less about inheritance and much more about courageous responsibility. For a moment, Noah felt the loneliness of the task before him, a loneliness that would become his furnace of faith. No teacher remained to confirm the whispers he heard from heaven. There was no one left to tell him if the voice within was truly the voice of God. The only company in that silence was the memory of Methuselah's steady wisdom, burning in his heart like coals in a midnight fire. Noah's journey from grandson to chosen vessel began, not with brilliance or ability, but with quiet trust. There is a sacred humility in preparation, especially when it seems the world is conspiring against hope. Noah did not hesitate. He obeyed, not to ease his pain or avoid suffering, but because he recognized that sometimes holy obedience means carrying the burden for a world too blind to believe. The calling was both terrible and beautiful. It was not a path of escape, but of endurance, not comfort, but consecration. So Noah built. Each swing of the hammer echoed Methuselah's teachings. Faith does not always see the storm, but faith always builds the ark. For years, each plank and nail was laid with purpose, guided not by human logic, but by the unseen hand that had guided his ancestors. The process was slow, even grueling. Doubt, disdain, and ridicule surrounded him. Neighbors jeered. Friends vanished. Noah's sons felt the sting of public scorn. Yet every task completed was more than construction. It was legacy incarnate, a tribute to every patient moment when Methuselah, Enoch, and those before had nurtured faith against all odds. Still, the ridicule had its own role in shaping a new kind of spiritual strength within Noah. In a world obsessed with visible results, the very act of building became a sermon without words. Outsiders saw only madness. Noah saw prophecy unfolding. The embodiment of conviction formed when one believes in promises that are no longer visible but still destined. This is the paradox of God's ways. His greatest works often take shape not in the roar of the crowd, but in the quiet persistence of those who build out of sight. Noah's persistence, inherited through story, faith, and spiritual mentorship, was not solitary. He trained his sons not just in carpentry, but in courage. Shem, Ham, and Japheth hammered, sawed, and prayed, learning that every faithful act, no matter how ridiculed, was a thread in the tapestry of God's design. The raising of the ark was more than an engineering feat. It was an act of consecration, a physical embodiment of a spiritual promise, an answer to Methuselah's deepest prayers. With the passing of years, the landscape of the world seemed to conspire against each act of faith. Storms became unpredictable, winds ominous, and the air thick, like prophecy itself. Creation was restless. Animals grew uneasy. Even the soil seemed to pulse with an expectation. The days grew darker, but Noah's heart remained steadfast, guided by the echoes of Methuselah's warnings and the certainty of purpose. His faith grew into resolve. Then the great sign arrived, animals gathering in pairs, an event inexplicable, orchestrated by forces even the hard-hearted could not mock away. Wordless and willing, they moved toward the ark, marching past the disbelieving crowds. This was the moment prophecy became visible. Those who had scoffed now watched in awe and fear, yet Noah remained untouched by their reactions. His anchor was God's instruction, not the favor or fury of men. He entered the completed vessel with his family, not as a hero marked by thunder, but as a servant marked by obedience. The transition from chaos outside to the sacred quiet inside the ark marked the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Every step into the vessel was a step deeper into legacy. Noah did not walk into safety alone. He carried the memories of Enoch's walk, the courage of Methuselah, and the voices of generations who had kept the flame alive. As the heavens grew heavy and the rain began to fall, the world outside passed the point of no return. Through confusion and scattering crowds, Noah's family remained grounded not in circumstance, but in covenant. The silence inside the ark became holy ground. It was here, buoyed on waves of divine mercy, that legacy was tested and ultimately fulfilled. The ark rode atop a sea of judgment, but inside beat a lineage of faith, every plank sown decades before with patient endurance now keeping a chosen remnant afloat. There was no magic, no outstanding miracle, only the steady fulfillment of what was spoken in silent faith over centuries. Faithfulness, Methuselah's ultimate lesson, finds its true power in endurance. The ark was not just a vessel of wood and pitch, it was the living testimony of all those who believed when belief was regarded as foolishness. In every soul saved from the flood was the echo of Enoch's trust and Methuselah's patience. Legacy, when rooted in truth and cultivated by devotion, may defy public notice, but it guides destiny itself. For those now listening to this story, let it impress upon your heart the acts of faith you sow, whether seen or unseen, can carry generations through their storms. Scripture describes the unseen as more real than the momentary struggles of sight. The God who watched Methuselah remain steadfast while the world ignored him is the same God who spared Noah to begin anew. True legacy outlasts every flood of chaos, every season of silence. In a culture always pressing for quick results and obvious miracles, the wisdom of Methuselah is this: the greatest inheritance you leave may be a quiet obedience that is mocked today, but will sustain hope when nobody else remembers the world before the rain. Every plank, prayer, and moment of devotion we build, when anchored in God's promise, will become an ark of deliverance, generational salvation. The rain will come, but the prepared heart will stand. And if the silence after the storm feels heavy, know that it is filled with the breath of new beginnings. If you believe in the power of faith sown in silence, hit that like button, subscribe to Bible Stories, and share this word. With every story retold and every lesson remembered, the legacy of righteousness grows anew, within, across, and far beyond your own generation. The rain began as a whisper, a gentle tapping on the roof of the ark, and yet it carried the sound of every prophecy, every warning, every prayer ever uttered by those who had walked the narrow path before Noah. This was the moment all history had been turning toward, the fulfillment, not just of judgment, but of preservation. Inside the ark, silence reigned. No chatter, no frantic movement, only the muffled breath of anticipation and the slow, steady rhythm of water gathering on the earth. The world outside had reached the climax of its rebellion, but inside the vessel built on generations of reverence, a new future waited, rocked gently by the tide of holy endurance. Noah's thoughts must have drifted back to the steady voice of Methuselah. Woven through the years like a melody, faithfulness is its own prophecy. The rain outside was not a surprise for Noah. It was the answer to a lifetime of preparation and suffering. Every memory of walking with Methuselah, their silent strolls beneath a clouded sky, lessons whispered by firelight, stories retold and made real, echoed in Noah's resolve. No matter how loud the storm, he was not alone. Every board, every prayer, every patient hour had become the lifeboat now cradling his family. As the waters rose, the outside world faded into legend. The voices that had mocked, the crowds that had doubted, the culture that had scorned the sacred were now drowned by the patience of God. For days and nights, the sky wept, and the ark was an island of memory, a bridge between what was and what could be, held aloft by the threads of Enoch's vision and Methuselah's perseverance. It is in moments like this, in the hush after the storm's fury, that legacy is revealed for what it is, not a monument to reputation, but a shelter for survival. Inside the ark, every breath drawn was a breath given by those who came before. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with their wives, represented not just the future, but the living answer to the question Methuselah had carried all his life. Would faith be remembered? Would sacred fire endure? As rain battered the hull, the lessons of humility and hope, so often sown in silence, now bore fruit. No one inside the ark spoke of survival as a right. They understood it as a calling, a trust to carry forward. The length of the flood mirrors life's hardest seasons. Sometimes even those who walk in faith must endure endlessly grey days, waiting, hoping, trusting, not because they see the sun, but because they trust the God beyond the clouds. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God endures forever. Isaiah 48. Patience, as Methuselah taught, is more than waiting. It is holding fast when endurance is all that remains, refusing to abandon hope even as a generation slips away. As animals paced the decks and silence hung like mist, the weight of what had been left behind pressed heavily. Yet it was in this waiting that Noah's family grew closest to the God of their ancestors. If legacy is best measured by what we pass on in silence, then Methuselah's greatest offering was not his words, or even his age, but the silent, steadfast courage to trust when the world seemed lost. Eventually, at the appointed time, the rain ceased. The sun reappeared, tentative but persistent. The water receded, and the ark settled and grounded. But Noah did not hasten out. He waited for the signal, for God's voice, for certainty that the ground could bear the weight of a new beginning. In his patience was the echo of Methuselah's restraint, a refusal to rush God's timing, a discipline born of centuries of watching, sowing, and waiting. As the doors opened and the world gleamed with the promise of restoration, every step onto dry land was sacred. The old world had ended, but the lessons learned there would become the foundation stones of a new civilization. Worship was the first act, gratitude before ambition, humility before conquest. The altar Noah built with his hands carried offerings, but each stone also carried the inheritance of faith, the bloodline of those who endured for the sake of righteousness. Noah looked at his sons and knew that their destiny would be shaped, not by the flood that judged, but by the faith that preserved. The seeds planted by Methuselah and Enoch gave way to new growth, new hope, new stories, new prayers. The world would remember the flood, but the real miracle was that legacy could float atop a wave of chaos, that faith sown in obscurity and silence could break the pattern of destruction, outlast the scoffers, and give birth to a future worth living. In every storm, there is a remnant determined by those who believe before they see. The quiet lines of faith, humility, patience, and gentle obedience. Those are the cords that hold the world together through every flood. Sometimes we believe our story ends when the rain finally falls. Methuselah's story teaches us otherwise. Our greatest purpose may bloom in the next generation, our truest impact only surfacing when our patient prayers have become someone else's foundation for courage. For those listening now, what is the ark you are building? What legacy will your quiet, hidden acts of faithfulness become? Every generation needs someone to believe, to prepare, and to wait. Not for recognition, but so that the next dawn might carry hope that the night can never drown. Take a moment to reflect, to share, to pray for the courage to build what no one else believes in. Like and subscribe to Bible Stories, staying anchored in these truths that echo from the highest places of heaven right into the storms of our own souls. One day, perhaps your name will not be widely known, but your faith, like Methuselah's, can become the shelter, the witness, and the song that rides above the rising tide. The rain will pass, the waters will recede, but the word of God and the faith of the righteous will remain forever. In the aftermath of the flood, when the rain receded and the new world breathed its first hopeful air, the legacy of faith proved stronger than any storm. For Noah, stepping from the ark was more than survival. It was living out the fulfillment of promise and obedience that began generations before him. He emerged not only as a survivor, but as the living vessel for the sacred fire kindled by Enoch's walk and Methuselah's endurance. In this new dawn, every footstep upon the drying earth was a testimony to the endurance of quiet faith, and every prayer an echo from the lives that came before. Those first moments on a cleansed earth must have been filled with awe and humility, a sobering awareness that creation itself had been reset, and that Noah and his family were chosen to begin again. In their worship, as they built the first altar and offered their thanks, lay an understanding as old as time that the greatest miracles often come after the longest waits, and the most profound victories are often born from silent endurance and steady trust, not from sudden triumph. Noah was not just repopulating the earth. He was sowing again the seeds of faithfulness, integrity, and remembrance that Methuselah labored for centuries to plant. It is here, in the aftermath of judgment, that the true value of legacy becomes clearest. When voices around you fall silent and the crowds evaporate, what remains is the character built by unseen choices. Methuselah's story, his waiting, his unseen sacrifices, his willingness to labor without recognition, shaped the very foundation upon which Noah would stand. This is the value of faith in a world that forgets. It weaves together generations, forming an unbreakable line of spiritual succession, a river of blessing and wisdom flowing through the cracks of history's hardest moments. Every generation faces its own version of the flood, the chaos, the storms, the seasons when everything familiar is washed away and only the core of who we are remains. In those times, it's not the loudest or most celebrated who persevere, but the steady, the humble, and the wise. Just as Methuselah's consistency became a shield for humanity, your quiet perseverance can become a shelter for those who come after. Legacy is not always measured by the grand or the visible, but by those sacred, uncelebrated acts of faith and love. As Noah's children scattered and nations began anew, the same questions whispered by Methuselah to his descendants would echo in the hearts of many. Will you hold fast to what is good, even when the world rejects it? Will you quietly teach your children truth, plant seeds in faith, and trust the harvest to a future you may never see? Will your life stand as a blessing in the silence between generations? The story of Methuselah is not just a chapter from antiquity, but an ongoing summons to guard the flame, to recognize the sacred in the simple, to believe that the smallest acts of faith can ripple across centuries. In an era consumed with speed, noise, and instant gratification, wisdom sometimes hides in the slow passage of time. The most lasting change, Scripture reminds us, is forged out of patience, humility, and steadfast obedience. The grass withers, the flowers fade, but the word of the Lord stands forever. Isaiah 48. When you are tempted to despair at the silence that greets your prayers, to doubt the value of staying true in a world committed to forgetting, remember Methuselah. His reward was not public acclaim, but the subtle, powerful assurance that his labor would bloom long after his own breath faded. So, if a piece of this story has spoken to you, if you find yourself longing to make a difference that endures past the storms of your own generation, remember that you are part of a sacred lineage. Your quiet resilience today may be the very thing that preserves others tomorrow. What you carry in faith, you carry for more than yourself. In every act of unrecognized obedience, every prayer whispered in solitude, every lesson repeated in love when no one seems to listen, you are shaping the world's next dawn. As we close this journey through Methuselah's story, may his example become a call not to chase noise, but to cultivate roots, not to demand miracles, but to embody consistency, not to seek legacy for legacy's sake, but to quietly prepare a vessel for those who will one day face their own flood. Like a seed planted in the dark, your faith may remain unseen, but it will not be forgotten. Because in the kingdom of heaven, hidden things yield the greatest harvest. Thank you for walking this long road with us. If Methuselah's testimony of patience, faith, and enduring wisdom has touched your heart, please honor his legacy by liking this video, subscribing to Bible Stories, and sharing it with someone who needs encouragement to keep sowing in faith. Let your life be a living thread in the chain of the faithful, so that together we can keep the ancient flame burning until the end. Remember, your legacy is not measured in applause, but in the quiet echoes of faith that change the world, one generation at a time.